Hello everybody, and welcome back to another reading video here on my channel, and also another monthly wrap-up. It's been a few months since I've actually made one of these videos, and we are in a completely different state, and I feel like my reading has been more selective, I guess you could say, since I only have so many books here in the camper, which is all technically of my physical TBR, but I have certain books in certain boxes, and I only have one box technically open, and the other box, or a second box, I slightly open. But for the most part, I'm just trying to finish off my priority TBR, so I have slim pickings, I feel like. I have a few books sitting over here, and I did a lot better considering we went on vacation. We also went home to close on our house, and also at the beginning of this month we were on our way out to North Carolina, so we had multiple times of traveling, a lot of time that I didn't necessarily read, and also when we first got here there was just so much going on that for the first, I think, half a week, if not the first week we were physically in North Carolina in this camper, I did not read a single book. So I'm very surprised at how well I did, and without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into it. To start off this video, I want to go over the books that I had technically picked out for my June TBR. These books, like I said, I was just pulling mainly from my priority TBR box that I had all my books boxed up in, and I had already been, I think, like 40 give or take pages into Things We Never Got Over by Lucy Score, and I did actually read this. Then we had also The Queen of Nothing, and I did read this one. I also had The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo that I really wanted to get to. I just didn't honestly have enough time in the month because I decided to pick up a different book instead of picking up this one, which honestly I'm not bad about. I did not take this one on vacation, I guess is mainly how I'm trying to say that. I had this book prepared for if we got back from vacation and I needed another book, I would read this next, but I brought 4 books on vacation and I read 3 out of the 4 books, or I at least had started 3 out of the 4 books. I finished 2 out of them. So this one I sadly did not get to, but I do want to get to. Maybe not here in the next couple months, but definitely this year. And we have book number 2 in the Ember and the Ashes series. I don't know exactly what that series is called, but this is A Torch Against the Night, and I was so excited to get into this book, but I did not actually have time for this either, which I'm super sad about, but I do want to read it this month, or like in the next couple months. I might end up reading it anyways, even if it's not going to be on my TBR for this month. And finally, we have a good old Louis L'Amour, which actually I did read this one. This one was also Silver Canyon. I am back. My son woke up, so of course mother duties come before this stuff. Anyways, starting out the month, or the first book that I actually finished in the month of June was a book that I started on the 18th of May, and because of renovations and moving and selling our house and other things like that, it just took me a while to actually get into it, or not so much get into it, but get through it. I remember, I think I picked it up and I was mowing. I had listened to the audiobook. I was mowing our 4.5 acres and it took a couple hours, and I just thought that this book was a lot different than the first book. It was more based on theology, more slow paced, more like thinking, or like made you think about what was going on and some of the events, some of the things that kept happening in this world, I'm gonna say. And unlike the first one where you still have like this war going on, but it's a different war, and you kind of talk about it in the second book. There's a lot that hints at the first book, which I really loved, but the first book I just felt like was more fast-paced and just more of a sci-fi book that I loved. That doesn't mean I didn't actually love this book, and this is actually Speaker for the Dead. This is book 2 in Ender's Game, which I think it's a 5-book series, but like I said, this was just a more slower paced. We have more theology, so there's a lot of religion in this book, which is fine, but it's just, you go from having more of like almost a high stakes first book with this war going on. You have Ender, who's in this school and he's learning how to basically command armies and do things while playing games for the most part, and then you hop into this book and you have this war that's going on. It's a different war, but you have something that happens in the end of the first book that I can't spoil. There's something that needs a specific planet or like space away from other things that I'm just gonna say, and Ender is trying to find that location, and as this is going on you meet these things called, like, they call them the piggies. I don't remember what exactly they are, but they're like pig human things, and they end up killing people and then planting trees where they killed people, and there's like a whole mystery about them, and there's also just a weird connection. And I like the end of the book. I definitely feel like there were parts of this book that stood out from others, but at the same time it was just very slow paced, and it took me, I don't know, half a month to read or more because I was busy. So I felt like a lot of my time I spent reading this book and kind of enjoying but not really enjoying. Like I was just reading it just because I had started it and I wanted to finish it, but I still enjoyed it at the same time, if that makes sense. I know that's kind of contradictory of itself, but that's kind of my thought process on this book. I did rate this book 3.5 stars. I think Ender's Game was either 4.5 maybe, or 4 stars, so this one was a lot lower, but I am still hopeful for the next book because there's talk about some things at the end of this book that I feel like will make the next book more like the first book. And then we hop into 3 books that I read in a reading vlog right before going on vacation, and that will be in the video posted right before this video, so if you've already seen that, I'm so sorry for all the spoilers. But starting on June 2nd, 2nd and going all the way to the 11th, I did pick up Things We Never Got Over by Lucy Score, and this was my third Lucy Score book. I had one book that I didn't like from her, one book that I did like from her, and this book kind of settled that with being I did actually enjoy this book. I rated it 4 stars. There were some things about it that definitely annoy me, especially like feminine things that I just feel like females talk way too much about, and we need to kind of keep that a little bit more private. The grumpy meets sunshine, I totally understand the trope, but at the same time I just was getting annoyed sometimes because I felt like it was a little too grumpy or a little too mean, like rude, and I don't know, at first I felt like I didn't feel the chemistry between them and I didn't see how this would really work out. But then I feel like once we got more of a turning point for something, I can't spoil something, but there's something that happens revolving another person that comes back, and there's like almost a way, like not high stakes, but like more drama and like a theft, things like that. Once that all started happening, I felt like I came around with this book a lot more and I could see the characters more, because I feel like you kind of see our main male character change his perspective, or like just how he talks, and that's when I really started liking this book. So overall, I do think that this was a 4-star book. I'm excited to get to the rest of the series, but now that I definitely know that each of these books in the series is about the 3 boys, I'm gonna say, or the 3 men that are in this town, I'm less inclined or less likely to like the next book. I feel like I might enjoy it, but I feel like the last one will be the one that I'm most anticipated for, because out of the 3 of them, I was okay with him. The brother, I feel like has a good story, but like he wasn't my favorite person. But then the other person, there's so much mystery and like setup with that guy that I feel like we could get a good love story with him and some other person from the book, which I don't want to spoil, but they're both in this book. So I feel like the setup for the 3rd book, it will be really, really good. But otherwise, this book, I'm glad I started. This was also on my 26 and 26, so I finally got around to it after it's sitting on my physical TBR for multiple years. So then starting on the 11th and going all the way to June 18th, I did pick up a book that completed a series on my list, and this was actually The Queen of Nothing. This is book number 3 in the Cruel Prince trilogy, and I'm not gonna lie, I felt like the first book was so in the middle. I didn't really care for that book and I didn't really hate it at the same time, and then we get to the 2nd book and the 2nd book started off like that, and I was like, oh no, I'm not gonna like this series. But then I think like 100 pages in or so into that book, I really started to like it, and then maybe like the last 100 pages I really, really loved, and I really liked how the 2nd book was. I loved how it ended. So then hopping into this, I did need a refresher. I feel like at first I felt like this book had so much more potential, and then we get into it and there were some moments that I was really invested in, but then other moments that I felt like maybe I was just reading this just because I had started it, like I said, with The Speaker for the Dead, and I just wanted to finish it. I think maybe it's also the time period, like we just had a lot going on, so I was more distracted while reading it. But I did have a couple moments that I really loved. There was something maybe like 100 pages in that I absolutely loved, and then the last, I'd say definitely the last 100 pages really made up for this book, and I actually rated this book 3.5 stars. And this book in particular, I feel like was a good conclusion to the trilogy, and also for me potentially reading anything from Holly Black, but more so I'm not going to go with any of the extra novellas or anything that was added on to this series or like a sister series. I just want to complete this trilogy, or at least I did complete this trilogy, and that's all I really want. So I'm happy about that, and The Wicked King was the one that was on my 26 and 26, but I did get to cross another series off of my list. Then starting on the 18th and ending on the 21st, I picked up a book right before going on vacation. I think the night before we left, and this is actually Louis L'Amour's Silver Canyon. It's only 164 pages, I do believe, but the action in this book, the amount of stuff that's in here was so good. And I also liked how this wasn't a very typical Louis L'Amour book. Like, it's very similar, but from all the books that I've ever read, you usually have a strong female character, main character, or you have other people and they're usually on like cattle drives or just going on the trail, going west. And for the most part, this book wasn't like that. We do have this guy who pretty much only owns his horse and what's on his back, and he is traveling from who knows where, but he stops in this town and he ends up seeing this girl, and immediately he's like, this is the woman I want to marry. So he kind of tells her and he kind of leaves it up to her a little bit, but then he leaves and he comes back later after he sees her again. But after this, there's been some trouble in town and there's some other things, and he learns about this like war or this feud going on, and it's mainly about this guy who owns this land. He has a little bit of water or like a creek coming off of this section of river, and they're out in the desert, so there's not much. I think they're in Utah technically, but they're in this deserty area and there's no water source for the most part. And this guy's got this like oasis because he's got this nice land and he's got all this water, so he owns this. And there's 2 neighboring places that really want his land just because they have cattle and they keep stealing his cattle, and they want it because of that water, because it's so like nutrients and like just fertile, and they can grow stuff there, and also like I said, they could use it for their cattle. So then there's like this little war that starts. And basically this guy is like, or our main character, he's like, hey, I have nothing on my back to provide for you, talking to this girl. And he's like, I want to settle down roots and then I will come back for you and you will be my wife. So basically he goes to this man who owns this land that he's basically in the middle of all this feud, and he's like, hey, let's have a working partnership, and then that way when this is all over and anything happens, I have your house and your land. And then later on he gets to a point where he has to fight to keep his house, and there's just some things about this book that I really enjoyed. I love a good Louis L'Amour story. I love westerns, and I really liked how this one was because, like I said, I just felt like it was a little bit more unique from the other ones that I've read, and I thought there were moments that were so funny. I was sitting here telling my husband and I was cracking up laughing out loud. Our main character was just a little bit cocky, but like in a controlled way, I guess that makes sense to say. He said some things, but he's like, no, I can't say anymore. I gotta turn around and walk away. That way she's left curious. She's left wanting to know more about me, and I'm not overstepping my welcome with her. The more he kept talking, the more I was like, hold on a minute. Like that was kind of smooth, but at the same time, like, why are you saying this? Like your ego is up here and you need to be like down here. All in all, I did rate this 4 stars, and I highly recommend Louis L'Amour books. And then the final book that I have for the month of June was actually a book that I started on the 21st and finished on the 25th, right before coming home. We were in Alabama at Fort Morgan, and this was Every Summer After. I wanted this as a beach read, and I know this is more of a lake style book, but it was summer. It's one of those that I have no summer books, no really beach reads, and I felt like this was more the vibe of being on vacation, and let me just tell you, it definitely was. I rated this book 4.5 stars. This was my first Carly Fortune book, and I really enjoyed this. I do want to read more from her if I can thrift them. I do believe I thrifted this one because for the most part I thrift all of my books. If not, I get them half price books. This one was a little bit frustrating, only to the point like there's a little bit of cheating that I did not appreciate. I did not like at all. Otherwise, I felt like the whole story was very interesting. I really liked the childhood friends to lovers, and also how they met around like 14. I think with my husband and I met him and I was 13, about to turn 14. So I was like, oh, this is very close. Except for the fact that we didn't start dating until I was 17. So a few years had went by and we weren't necessarily like best friends, especially not like this. So this was interesting because I was kind of reliving some of that and just funny at the same time. And then some of the things like the longing and the slow burn I felt like was really good. The thing that happened at the end, like the third act conflict that we were building up to, or not so much third act, but the thing that we were building up to at the reason why they weren't necessarily together, I felt like was a valid reason, but also that's the part that I didn't necessarily like as much, or I didn't like that whole thing. But I also like the underlying, I'm gonna say like backstory of where we have this family and somebody's mother dies, and so they're trying to come back for the funeral. And I do kind of think that death or like grief in general is very common in beach reads or in romance books like this. I feel like that's like the #1 topic that people talk about, and this isn't like a main topic, but it is kind of like the underlying thing, or like the reason why a couple people went back to a place that they haven't visited in like a decade or so. I thought that was a little cliche in terms of how many books I've read with the topic of grief, but I think this was done really well because it also wasn't like the main focus. It wasn't like we were dedicating the entire book mainly to grief with a subplot of romance. This was like of these two people, these two best friends and their childhood, and then also as they're an adult and coming back together. Moving on, closing a chapter, and I thought it was really good. Definitely 4.5 stars, and I'm so excited to read more of her books, and I also see why people read her books and rate her books so good. And this was a debut apparently, which was super nice. So here are the 5 books that I did tackle in the month of June. I did have 5 on my TBR, but I did not read the full 5 on my TBR. I did read 3 out of those 5 books, which I feel like is pretty good considering I was also trying to mood read a little bit more, especially when we went down to the beach. So also a lot of these were like blue and gray. This one is the only outlier, but honestly, so good. Let's go ahead and get into one of my favorite sections of wrap-up videos. It is the monthly statistics. First, we're gonna start with my 26 and 26. Now, it's been a while since I've updated. I think March was my last wrap-up that I actually filmed. So some of these might be completely different because originally I had 5 books that I had crossed off, and now, sitting right now, I have 11 books crossed off my 26 and 26, and only 2 of those books that I read this month were on that list, that being Every Summer After and also Things We Never Got Over. That now puts me at 42% completed, and we are halfway through the year. Actually, we are now a month past halfway through the year, so I need to kind of ramp it up or step it up a little bit more. The one thing that I really hate, I'm not gonna lie, right before moving, because I didn't have my book journal, I had boxed it up. We went thrifting and to some antique malls, and I ended up picking all of these books up for Ender's Game, except for the very last one. I bought a lot of books, and now I have a lot of books on my physical TBR, which I do not like because I'm supposed to be around 65 or so books at the end of the year, and I'm now sitting at 80 books on my physical TBR. You know what it was back in March when I last did one of these wrap-ups? 75. I have gained 5 books on my physical TBR, even though I have read, I think, like 10 or so books since then. That's how bad of a problem I have. At least a lot of them too were series, and like I bought from Ollie's a 3-book box set from a thriller author, so there's a lot of books added up right there. This year too, I have finished 30 books, which means I am only 5 books away from my first book goal. My other book goal's at 65. I don't know if I'm gonna actually get to that or not. I mean, we're halfway through the year, so there's potential I could get to 60 or 65 books. We're on a good track for that, I'm not gonna lie. Also, as we're currently sitting, YA fantasy is now my top genre with 10 whole books, and in second place is thrillers with 7 books. Of course, the air kicked back on. For the month of June, I read 5 books, which equated to 1,705 pages. I had 0 5 stars, sadly. I did have 2 5 stars a couple months ago. I think April was when I had 2 5 stars. So sad I never did a wrap up, and I really don't feel like adding to this wrap up to do those wrap ups as well. But An Ember in the Ashes was one of them. And then the final book of the Young Elites, which is called The Midnight Star by Marie Lu. That was the other 5-star read, and that was the only 2 I have for this entire year so far. And they were 2 back to back, which was crazy. And finally, my favorite book for the month of June was none other than my highest rated book, which was Every Summer After. I really love this book, and I see why it's so hyped up. And that is everything I have for my June wrap up. I hope you guys all enjoyed this video, and I hope you guys all enjoyed the books. Be sure to subscribe and stay tuned, because right after this, I'm gonna go film my July TBR, and I have some books that I'm super excited to read, and I feel like it's a good variety as well. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope to see you in another video here on my channel, and as always, God bless!